Everyone. Um, my name is Elizabeth Crow, and I'm very pleased to be able to serve as a league president of our local Boulder County chapter, and really thrilled that Mikkel is here tonight to lead us through this process. I'll just say a couple of things and then turn it over to Mikkel. But, we are all here because we love this organization. We love League. We love what League stands for. And we've been working in our local chapter to also just do some acknowledgement along with our state colleagues at the state level, at the national level, that the League is not always been the open and inclusive organization that we strive to be now. And that dates back to the origins of the suffrage movement and the founding and the origins of this organization. And that does not need to kind of be our ball and chain, but it is something that we need to acknowledge and recognize and just continue to see where we can grow and expand as an inclusive organization. So this is one really great step for us, and hopefully many, many more to come have been and will continue to do this, and just really appreciate having a local organization as strong as OUT Boulder County to be really leaders in this community and really helping us call us all in to this space where we can have good conversation and figure out how we can do better. So thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much, Elizabeth, for that introduction. I feel like I love that framing of, we're here to call folks in and help. We're all helping each other do better and learn. And I really try to approach, my job as like an educator. It is not about shaming or being embarrassed about what we didn't know or what we think we should know. It's very much around we're continually learning and continually doing better. And it's a gift to offer these things to each other and offer, updated information or gentle corrections or these things. Like it's actually helping us all along the way and helping all of us. So my name is Mikkel. I use they pronouns. In English and Spanish, I use the pronoun ella, which is a gender neutral pronoun that's newer in Spanish instead of ella or el. I'm the director of education and research with OUT Boulder County, and I've been with OUT Boulder for over 5 years, and this has been a part of my job that whole time. A lot of my other duties have shifted over the years. This has been a solid part of my job the whole time, though. And I'm here just to offer some education. Anytime I train on this content, it's important to acknowledge for some folks who are in the Zoom room or in the room with us here today physically, that this might be repeat, might be a refresher, might be something that you know intimately well in your personal life, live and breathe every day, or know through family members. And for some folks, it might be kind of brand new. Wherever you're starting today is fine and welcome and celebrated in this room. And I'm hoping wherever you are in that, you gain something from this today. If this is pretty familiar to you, perhaps the way I'm phrasing something or just talking about something can help you when you're having those conversations out in the world. You can rip off any of my slogans or anything I have to say today. This isn't that proprietary information. This is information we want to spread out to the world. And so I hope that you feel more comfortable after today doing that, having these conversations, bringing up these topics, offering corrections or updated information to folks whenever it comes up, you have the opportunity to in your life. So so you're welcome wherever you are, whether you're like a little nervous because this is new, or you're like, okay, let's see how this person talks about this stuff that I know pretty well. All is welcome. I will try to pay attention to our virtual friends here and the chat as well. I'll make sure I keep a visual on that. You can also see it up here. I just so you can see our little virtual folks on the side are visible up there. So most of you turn your camera off, that's fine. You can turn your camera on if you would like. So I invite questions. That being said, we're all at different levels. Sometimes it can be scary to be in that kind of mixed level learning environment, to ask questions that seem like, I'm supposed to know this, or it seems so rudimentary. Let all that go out the window. Ask your questions, be brave. If you're unsure about something, or if I said something too quickly or covered something too quickly and you're like, whoa, let's repeat that, or let's revisit that. Please speak up and say that, because if you're sitting there thinking that, someone else probably is too. And even if you're like, I think I got it, but you just want to make sure you got it so you can then be comfortable having those conversations with other people, please bring that up. Don't be afraid to ask stupid questions. There's no stupid questions. And if you ask a question that is using maybe like outdated language or, something that could be considered problematic, that's part of the learning process. And I'm here for that. I'm getting paid for this. Okay. So I might not say the same thing if I was just saw you at the grocery store, but like today, right now here, yes, absolutely. Please ask me any weird, awkward question. I've heard it all, and it's fun. It's part of my job. I also have put my business cards out here, and we'll make sure everyone online gets my contact information. If you want to have a follow-up more, like this maybe wasn't appropriate to bring up in the group session, but I want to talk more, a little one-on-one, I'm totally here for that as well. You can feel free to reach out to me. OUT Boulder County is a great resource and happy to provide information and just conversation. Sometimes a one-on-one is a 15-minute conversation can make a world of difference sometimes. So totally here for that as well. So I like to try to like just get people a little comfortable, relax. I'm not big and scary. Just want to be accessible for folks. So what we're gonna cover today in our time together, quick intro to OUT Boulder County. Just want to make sure you're aware of us as an organization, get into some LGBTQ concepts, things that are important to know. And then I think the most important part is etiquette essentials. Like, okay, it's important to know the concepts, but then what do we do with it in the real world? So that's what we'll do. OUT Boulder County is an LGBTQ community center advocacy organization. We do a lot of stuff. The way I kind of think about it in my head is we do a lot of inward facing community development where we're supporting LGBTQ youth. We're supporting LGBTQ individuals in their journey, helping them get connected to mental health care, helping them find community and opportunities to connect and have fun and party, like all the things. And then also we do outward facing stuff. So that's a big part of my role is doing this kind of education. I work with nonprofits, local businesses, international businesses around the more like helping the rest of the world understand us and like get with it and know what's happening, within the queer community. So we try to, we have a pretty broad mission in that way. Yeah. So we do this, we activate our mission through a lot of different ways. We have social and support groups. If there's a few I like to highlight to make sure that you're aware of them so that if people in your life, this becomes relevant, you can be like, oh, wait, I know there's a group that it might be helpful or interesting for you. One is gender support. It's for 18 and up, people who are identify as trans or gender queer or non-binary or questioning their gender, think maybe they're trans or they're not sure. I don't know, I'm new to this, what? That's a great place to go and find peer support. They meet every single Thursday, and I think it's every single Thursday in person, and I think it's twice a month on Mondays virtually now. So we're trying to keep that accessibility available for people in person and virtual. And I think that group has predated OUT Boulder County even as an organization. It's been a really strong root in the community. We also have a group for queer and trans parents. So anyone in their parenting journey, whether they're trying to conceive or trying to adopt or have little ones or empty nesters, whatever, who are parents who are LGBTQ identified, place for them to find camaraderie, connection, have play dates, all the stuff. That meets, I think, once a month, and then they also usually do an in-person social as well. That meets virtually. And then another one I like to highlight, we call SOFA or SOFA, whatever. Significant others, friends, family, and allies of trans and gender expansive folks. So that's really like for the friends and family of someone who's trans. So, if your kid comes out as trans and you want to talk to other people who are going through a similar process of like, oh, my kid's trans now. Okay, now what do I need to know? What do I need to learn? There's a whole lot of process when someone transitions. It's not just a transition for them, it's a transition for everyone in their lives. There might be a new name, there might be new pronouns, just new ways of thinking, new concepts to learn. And so that group is a really important group just to find some support and also to like have an appropriate place to vent or to like express concerns. Like, I want to support my kid, but I gave them my mother's name and there's like, oh my God, all this emotion involved. And you don't want to process that out on your kid who's like in this delicate little budding phase of coming out. You want to talk to other people who are going through a similar and that appropriate way to have that support where your experiences of it could be validated, but you're not overrunning the poor little budding trans kid, right? So that group is also really important. I really like to highlight that that as a really good group. It's facilitated by 2 therapists. It's not therapy, but they are mental health professionals, so they have a lot of evidence-based knowledge and can really help connect and correct misinformation. There's a lot of misinformation about the LGBTQ community. It's part of why I do what I do, is to try to correct that. And you know, that's just unfortunate. That's something that we're having to combat in the world. We also have fun stuff like craft club and book club. And my coworker, I don't remember the schedule right off the top of my head. I think it meets twice a month and it is virtual. You can email me and I can follow up with details. It's on our website, but there's a lot on our website. So if you can't find it, let me know and I will direct you to the link exactly. And they do have like a little process where you like register and then they'll send you the link or something. We try to be really accessible, but also like have some security measures in place. So it's like a balance. Yeah. Oh, that looks like Diana is entering the waiting room. We also have a really robust youth program. It's another program I really like to highlight. We serve ages 11 to 18. If someone's under 12, they do need parental consent, but if they're 12 and up, they can participate without parental consent. We do have a lot of youth who don't have supportive families and have to navigate their lives in a particular kind of way, and we can offer them peer support and also get them connected to other resources as relevant. We have a lot of internship opportunities, so we can help them with leadership and skill development, and we have field trips and camps and retreats, all kinds. Our youth program has really grown in the past couple of years and is really transformational. And sometimes the first time a youth is finding an affirming place to exist. And we have lots of other programs I could talk all night about. I'm not gonna, happy to answer any questions around programs and services in particular, you know, maybe at the end of our time or as we're kind of wrapping up. I do trainings, we do advocacy. We did our first legislation last year, 2 pieces that both passed. It's very exciting. And we have one this year that I'll talk about at the end of our time together. Of course, we do Boulder County Pride. We do lots of events and parties too. It's sometimes it's like getting down and dirty in the fight, and sometimes it's putting on our heels and glitter and having a fun time. You know, all of it is equally important. So we do a little bit of everything. So, OUT Boulder County, anything LGBTQ. If we don't offer the service directly, we will connect folks to it. So no matter, you know, if it's a loved one of a person who's coming out as gay and they're like, oh, now I need to talk to someone about this. What do I need to know? Any of those things we can connect. Or I work with businesses who are trying to look at their policies around becoming more inclusive. And I do these trainings in businesses. So if you're connected or affiliated with any business or organization that could use this kind of training, grab my card, we can chat about what that could look like. And we try to adapt to the individual needs of each individual, each organization, whatever it is, to meet people where they are. So, okay, get off my OUT Boulder soapbox onto my LGBTQ soapbox. This is called the progress flag. There's many different LGBTQ flags, they're all great. This is the one we're using, meaning trying to be as inclusive as possible, with these pink and blue being and white being trans, brown and black representing our brown and black community members, and then all the colors. I can't remember exactly what each one stands for, but it's for the LGBTQ community as a whole. As we dive into this concept, like we're going to acquire knowledge about this community over here, I want to start to break down that distance there and encourage folks to just take a moment to reflect. Like, when did you first become aware of your sex or of your gender? When did you first become aware of your sexual orientation? It might not be one moment. It might be kind of like hazy. It's how development often happens, right? And when or how did you know? LGBTQ people get asked this all the time. When did you know? How did you know? You know? So I just like to kind of turn that back on the general population. Well, when did you know that, you know, okay, you're raised as a boy, but when did you know that you were a man? How did you know that you were a boy? You know? And there's not like a right or wrong answer. Stuff is very smushy. How has that understanding changed over time? For some people have a little bit more static identities, and for some of us, it's more loosey-goosey fluid. No way is better than the other. All the ways are good. So I just like to, you know, think about this. We're not just here to learn about other community. You know, like we all have a sexual orientation. We all have a gender identity. This is something that connects us all in our human experience. So just want to kind of break down some of those barriers. So maybe I should move these. Maybe I should close these guys. There we go. Now we can see the thing. I like to start with intersectionality before really diving into LGBTQ topics specifically. It's really important to just acknowledge the intersectionality of all of our identities, right? There's no one gay story. There's no one trans experience. It all depends on our unique intersections of identity. That could be our race, our ethnicity, which are languages we learned as a young person, the immigration status of our parents and our grandparents, what religious context we may come from, a geographic context we may come from, either in the world or within the country or within the state. You know, it's very different, just like a county over, just like a city over, right? That all those things really influence who we are. Our age influences how we see ourselves, and they intersect in a way that's like, you know, my religious background may influence how I understand sexuality, much less how I understand my own sexuality. So there's everyone's unique characteristics come together in a unique way. So again, no one LGBTQ story. I'm going to talk about different LGBTQ experiences, but that doesn't mean, you know, if I talk about a trans experience, it doesn't mean every trans person has that experience, right? People use different language and words to describe themselves. There's different ways of talking about this. So just kind of acknowledging that, and that shapes our experiences in the world as individuals. It shapes how we see ourselves, which is huge, right? How I see myself really informs how I navigate the world. So there's a lot of this like internal stuff coming out, but then there's just as much interplay with society and that external, you know, our social relationships, our families, our community, our society writ large that influences back, right? There's an exchange and an interplay happening, and our individual identities really impact and influence the structural opportunities we get access to or not, the privileges we get access to or not, are all informed by that intersection. And we know that, you know, the term intersectionality coined by Kimberly Crenshaw she was highlighting the difference between the experience of Black men, Black women, and white women. There's, you know, that Black women don't have just the women's experience or the Black experience. They have the Black women's experience, which is distinct from a white woman's experience, distinct from a Black man's experience. And so we can extend that to all these other intersecting identities. So me being a white queer person navigating the world we each have privilege and disadvantages in different ways that are unique to us. So just wanting to acknowledge that, yes, it's about us, but it really has real world implications. And the more folks can, I think, grasp that, the better we can do at making the world a little bit more just and equal. And then just to add, this is kind of like my preamble before we like really get into it. I love to end this section with Audre Lorde. There's no such thing as a single issue struggle because we do not live single issue lives. I think that really also speaks to that idea of intersectionality, and that like active healthcare is an LGBTQ issue. It's not like, oh, well, they can't. Still an LGBTQ issue, just realizing immigration is an LGBTQ issue, access to education is an LGBTQ issue, access to career advancement is an LGBTQ issue. They're not separate. All the things are overlapping and connected. Okay, so that's my like preamble of like, we understand the context, but now we are going to zoom in a little bit. I just don't want to be remiss in not acknowledging that from the get-go. So we're going to talk about four different characteristics today of our identity: sex assigned at birth, gender identity, gender expression, sexual orientation. Starting with sex assigned at birth, which is that physical anatomy at one's birth. We're talking about physical characteristics like genitalia, gonads, chromosomes, hormones, and secondary sex characteristics. Those are 5 different things. And we're often taught that there's the F package and the M package, and you get this 5 set of characteristics or that 5 set of characteristics, but actually people have different assortments of those different 5 characteristics. So they don't all correspond to that single sex in a way that we're often taught in, you know, our 5th grade or 6th grade PE sex ed class that was so informative, right? There's a lot of natural variation. I like to call this whole presentation Beyond Binary, acknowledging that our culture likes to put things neatly in little boxes, and that impulse to categorize itself is not bad. That's a human nature thing of trying to make sense of the world, and that's actually great. That's given us scientific advancement and understanding, but it also has led us to some misinformation that if we actually look at the reality of it, not so easily stuffed into boxes. Physical sex is one of those things too. We think, so many people are like, oh, well, it's just male and female. That's just it. That's just science. That's just biology. Well, biology is created by humans who categorize things in particular ways and find patterns and put our own ethos, our own ideas of interactions onto objective things. Like true objectivity is hard to access. So there's a lot of natural variation, right? There's not just distinct male and distinct female, and that's the end all story of sex assigned at birth. There's actually a range, a spectrum of the way our physical sex shows up as a species. And so I like this image here that shows that this intersex part of the spectrum, where it's kind of in between male and female. There's, one kind of fades into the other. I'm not replacing two categories with three. No, we can't be confined to the boxes. The boxes don't serve us. It's much more of a spectrum. So I want to encourage folks to move beyond that binary thinking, binary just being like a system of two, ones and zeros, 2-star binary star system. Moving beyond that system of two and into more spectrum thinking. And that's a way that's actually more reflective of how the world works and how humans work and how our identities work. Starting even with physical sex, that stuff you can touch and measure and tabulate in a really distinct way. Generally speaking, sex is assigned at birth based on an external inspection of genitalia. That's one of those 5 characteristics, right? And sometimes the package is as we expect it, and sometimes it's not. For folks that are intersex, there's many different ways that people can be intersex. And for some people, they might be born with what's commonly referred to as ambiguous genitalia. It's like, oh, well, it's bigger than a normal clitoris and it's smaller than a normal penis, right? What is it? And that's just someone's anatomy, right? So that might be evident right at birth. Back in the day, these babies would just be like operated on without even parental involvement or consent. Luckily, we have advanced beyond that, and now parents are involved. But the kind of information parents might get in this situation varies widely based on their doctor. There's nothing wrong with these babies. Generally speaking, babies who are born intersex have normal function, like normal urinary tract function. They might not be able to reproduce, but so that's also the case with people who are born female and people who are born male. Some people can reproduce, some people can't. Same for intersex people. Some intersex people can reproduce, some can't. The point is that it's not like extra tissue, right? Like that's someone's body part, and actually the part of like the highest concentration of nerve endings in the entire body. So it's like good for them, like yay for them and having their bodies intact. And actually these surgical interventions are still happening just with parental consent now. And these surgeries can actually introduce physical problems that wouldn't otherwise be there. I want to primarily chronic pain. I've read many testimonies around intersex folks advocating and sharing their stories. Chronic pain, also urinary tract issues where like they're trying to reroute their urethra and it's just like not quite working. So actually introducing problems that otherwise wouldn't exist. Also, not only the physical pain, there's also a lot of trauma and psychological pain that's usually baked into this process of like, don't tell anyone, don't show anyone your body parts, but then go to the doctor and drop your trousers like all the time and like getting poked and prodded and measured. And then a lot of times this is happening, it's not just like to infants, it's like a course of surgeries over someone's early life. And sometimes they're not told what's happening to them. So there's this like shroud of mystery around like what's going on with me, and they're not told. And it's only when they come of age and are able to get into their own medical records that they realize the truth about what's actually going on in their bodies that they were not given choice or agency over. So we support and amplify calls from intersex advocacy organizations to end these surgeries because we're all about bodily autonomy. That's what it comes down to, whether it's intersex issues, trans issues, reproductive rights issues. Bodily autonomy is kind of at the core of that. If an intersex person wants to have surgery on their genitals to make it appear one way or another, when they're of age and can make that decision as a mature adult, great. So we're just advocating that, and this is something that most people don't know about. So I really do spend like a good amount of time on this because first of all, I think it helps because people are like, it's a little more concrete because we're talking tissue, we're talking hormones, right? So it's a little more concrete. We can wrap our heads around it a little bit more. And so many people don't know about it. So I just like to spread the word. So in case you're like cousin's daughter has a baby and they're like, this comes up and they've never heard of this before, you can be like, wait, there was this training like 3 years ago. Let's do some research before we just jump to the scalpel option. Like, let's think about the repercussions and implications it's going to have on someone's life and read some testimonies before we just try to make this kid normal, right? Which is such a damaging thing for so many of us, probably for all of us. Okay, so some intersex people are born with that kind of ambiguous genitalia. It's evident at birth. It's other intersex folks, it might not be evident at birth. They might be born with, externally appear female and then find out later, like if they never start menstruating, don't really think anything of it, never start menstruating, go to the doctor, find out actually they have undescended testes and they're never going to menstruate. Like that's just not a part of their life. And they wouldn't know that until they had a symptom arise, like a lack of a menstruation or if they had developed stomach cramps or, like you wouldn't necessarily know unless there's reason to poke a little deeper and investigate a little deeper. Some intersex people appear androgynous. Some intersex people do not appear androgynous. Some intersex people identify as LGBTQ. Some intersex people do not identify as LGBTQ. So I do want to really, even though I'm spending a lot of time talking about intersex folks, just because someone's intersex does not mean they identify as part of the LGBTQ community. So that sometimes I think people get a little confused around that. So I want to try to prevent that confusion. This symbol here with the yellow background and the purple circle is the symbol for intersex individuals in the intersex community. And it's meant to convey a feeling of wholeness and completeness as they are, which I think is really powerful, not needing corrective surgery. Yeah, perfectly intact as is. About 1 to 2% of the population that we know of falls into this intersex part of the spectrum. About the same frequency as people of red hair. There's no correlation between the two as far as I know, but it's just like you can see someone's red hair. It's also about the same frequency as people who have green eyes. You can see when someone has green eyes when you're interacting with them. But you can't necessarily tell if someone's intersex when you're interacting with them, right? So it's a lot more common. You interact with people with red hair and green eyes every single day, probably, unless you're working remotely at home and never leave your house. And then you might even then, but you're every day, right? So it's just a lot more common than people think. 1 to 2% of the population might sound like a little bit at first, but 2 in 100, that's 1 in 50. And that's, I think, a low estimate because there's a lot of, again, there's no hard lines between intersex and male or intersex and female. Like, what do we count as intersex? There's some conversation happening. Do we count PCOS as an intersex condition or not? And that's polycystic ovarian syndrome, because some of the side effects of that are like masculinizing hormones and the secondary sex characteristics then. So, and I'm not saying I don't have a stance on that. I don't know enough about it, but just showing that there's this spectrum. If you counted kind of adjacent conditions, it could be up to 10% of the population. And again, that just really to underscore that this whole idea of like normal, we're done with it. We're over it. Doesn't actually accurately describe our species. So if we actually look at the variation that's happening on a physical level, the male and female categories aren't going to cut it, aren't going to do it justice. Any questions about intersex stuff or sex assigned at birth stuff?
I have a question now, but maybe the book part for at the end when we have to talk about policy advocacy. What are
Yeah.
I'll just leave it there.
Yeah.
I think that would be great to come back around.
Yeah. Yeah. And I will note that there has been some progress in intersex advocacy, and that the standard medical response used to just be like, yep, surgery, make it normal, and usually that meant trying to turn them female because it's easier to take away tissue than add tissue. luckily, because of all this advocacy, there's a couple hospitals that are the kind of the main ones that do these surgeries, have paused that policy and actually brought together a committee of people, including, go figure, intersex people for the first time, and paused, halted that policy and are undergoing, reevaluating that over the past couple years. I'm not sure where it is exactly right now, but so yeah, using political voice and advocacy, that is in large part thanks to Interact Advocates for Intersex Youth, Intersex Justice Project, which is primarily intersex people of color, are advocacy organizations that are responsible for that. Intersex Society of North America is more of like the scientific medical resource, and they have now been, like, they used to be a separate organization, now they're run by Interact. But that website, if you're like a science nerd or like a nurse and you like love this stuff, that's a great website just to learn more about like there's so many different conditions within the intersex experience. What are all those variations? You could spend hours just learning, and it's super cool. I'm a little bit of a science dork, so I'm like, go learn. Yeah, so great resources, great organizations to learn more about, to follow. If you're on the socials, they're good to follow. So that's all that physical sex. I like to say if it's sex assigned at birth too, because as we've seen or already talked about, like someone might be assigned female at birth and find out, well, actually they're intersex. The intersex community is not advocating to add an I on birth certificates. They're decidedly not advocating for that because they've experienced a lot of stigma and discrimination and are actively still. And if there's a way to easily identify all these intersex individuals in the country, that's scary, right? So we don't want to, that is not the call to action right now. More the call to action is to leave sex off birth certificates, is more what I've seen, in a way that actually benefits intersex folks and trans folks. And maybe I'm getting a little ahead of myself in that, but yeah, sex assigned at birth could be assigned one sex and turn out later in life to be a different sex, or with trans people may change your sex later on. So that phrasing, sex assigned at birth, is intentional. You may say assigned female at birth or female assigned at birth, like whatever. There's not like one way to say it. And it's just, sometimes it's relevant to know what sex someone was assigned at birth, and sometimes it's not. In medical settings, it's really more relevant to do like organ inventories, because not all females have the same organs anymore, for a variety of reasons. So depends on like what you're actually talking about, what you need to know. A lot of the times it's not relevant, especially like in social settings. It's not relevant for us to know what sex someone is assigned at birth. It's pretty, you're just walking up and being like, what genitals do you have? It's like, that's what you're actually asking, right? Yeah.
Do you think it would make a difference in more equity in research, scientific research, if there weren't an assignment at birth? I mean, most of the medical research, for example, is done with men, and they're finding, by golly, women are different.
Yeah.
And so if it weren't so prevalent at birth, do you think that would have an impact on research?
I think, I'm not sure if I'm totally following your question, but I think that like medical research is an example of when it would be relevant, to know like someone's assigned sex at birth. And in that, it seems like in that category, they would flag it as someone with a difference in sex development. That's often how intersex is referred to, like in the literature. Yeah, because there are those differences. And there's actually an NIH-funded project called All of Us Research Initiative or something, that's trying to target that problem exactly, where it's like, okay, this works at this, with no side effects, or with these side effects at this frequency or this rate of efficacy for, white men in their 30s. Right? Everyone else who knows. So that All of Us Research Initiative is trying to diversify the pool of genetic material and like biological samples that scientists can pull from to do testing, so that we'll have more information around like, okay, well, this actually interacts differently. It seems, statistically significantly differently among Black community, or among female, or among different ages, or, whatever. So that is a cool initiative trying to address some of that. Did I answer your question? Okay. Cool. All right, so that's physical sex. We're gonna leave that, go to the next Next phase, we're going to talk about gender. So I like to start with sex because it's a little easier. It's like, okay, we know we're talking about body parts. Gender is a little harder because it's like concepts. It's no less real, right? Concepts build and destroy dynasties, right? Concepts are our lives. So it's a cultural concept of roles and stereotypes associated with particular genders, which often correlate to being associated with particular sexes. A Western culture has a binary way of thinking about gender, so men and women, boys and girls. Not all cultures have that binary system. Some cultures have 3 distinct genders, some have 4, some have 5, some have 7, some have more than that. So just again, this thing that people living in our culture just are like, well, that's just the way it is. Well, there's more to it than that, right? It's not only, that's not the only way it is. And it's not just like a given, right? There's more complexity and diversity to it. So this, and I'm always afraid to say like, well, like, what is a woman? That's an answer I cannot answer, or a question I cannot answer for you. What is a man? I don't know. If you were to try to answer that question, you probably start pulling out a bunch of stereotypes and roles that you don't even believe yourself, right? Like, women wear heels. I don't know, like, well, so do our founding fathers. So do drag queens, so do what, I don't know, but we kind of have an idea of what a woman is, an idea of what a man is, even though we're kind of afraid to maybe say what it is because stereotypes and stuff. So within this idea of gender, there's gender identity and gender expression. And I think it's helpful to pull apart those concepts. Gender identity being how you identify yourself as an individual within that cloudy thing of gender within your culture. I align with this part of the spectrum over here. That makes sense for me, right? Gender expression being more the external communication of that. But just like sex is assigned at birth, gender is assigned at birth. Usually people don't even realize the distinction and they just lump it together. So I want to pull those concepts apart a little bit. Gender is also assigned at birth and reinforced over the lifespan. So when we see a baby with a vulva and we say female baby, sex assigned at birth. And when we say, girl, your name is Mary and you're going to have a pink ballerina themed nursery, that's gender. And we're reinforcing that gender when we say, you're going to be such a heartbreaker someday and you're just such a pretty, pretty princess. And you got to, I don't know, whatever weird things that people say to girls that they don't say to boys. That's reinforcement over the lifespan, right? So that's that like gender soup that we live in. And it's culturally specific and it changes over time. Pink used to be this like strong, robust, masculine color, and blue is this more like soft, demure, feminine color. High heels, originally designed for men. Long curly wigs, designed for men. I just think it's so ironic that like our founding fathers had like this long, curly, luscious locks of wigs and heels. And now folks who are all about the founding fathers can't handle a man with a long curly wig and heels. I don't know. That's maybe a sidetrack. Gender identity, so how one identifies within this concept of gender, right? Sense of self, core element of your identity. I'm a man, I'm a woman, I'm a something else. It's not visible. So again, I think of it as inside of your brain, not your body parts. So in contrast to male, female, intersex of our physical sex assigned at birth terms, we're talking key terms being like man, woman, cisgender, transgender, non-binary, genderqueer, gender fluid, agender. There's like so many, and I'm not here to overwhelm you with all the thousands of terms that our youth are coining because I can't even keep up with that. And that's an exciting thing. I don't want to like sound like I'm like playing that off as trifling. It's like, no, it's like actually exciting because you're doing identity exploration. I'm not going to give you 101 ABCs of LGBTQ because that would be outdated by the time I printed it. I would left someone off and then they would get mad at me. It's like, that's not helpful. I like to focus more on the concepts and understand that our language is a living, breathing thing. We're literally breathing it as we do it. And it's changing and it's fluid and that's cool. That's just how it is. And so like, I don't think that the fact that it's changing and evolving is a bad or scary or invalidating thing at all. I think that's how it's supposed to be. So I'm not going to give you a bunch of terms. However, if there are terms that have come up in your life, like you're like, oh my gosh, my nephew is now saying that they're this thing that I don't know what it is. I'm happy to like answer and define those to the best of my ability. However, I don't want to get into the weeds, shades of gray. I want to stay more focus on concepts. That being said, there are two or three terms I want to make sure you leave with: cisgender and transgender. Have folks heard of these terms? Maybe some yes. Okay, good. We're like some people are. This is starting to become more common and than it was. I actually read something today from 2015, an old document that my boss found this file and was like, here. And I looked at it and it was like guidance on how to communicate around these topics. And it was like, don't use the word cisgender because people don't understand it. Use non-transgender instead. And I was like, wow, we really have come a long way, right? That was what, 7 or 8 years ago. And now we can use cisgender. Most people have already heard this word or are starting to hear it, even if they're not totally clear on it. And cisgender is a value neutral descriptor adjective of people who identify with the sex and gender that was assigned to them at birth. It's not positive, it's not negative. It's just a way to just talk about your experience in contrast to someone else's experience, because it has real world implications, like we started at the beginning. It's sometimes abbreviated cis man, cis woman, CIS, that Latin root, same side as, so like kind of same side of that gender binary concepts that we're trying to dismantle. Someone who's transgender, think trans, like transportation, transcendental, some kind of movement or evolution or change, movement across. So that's someone who does not identify with the sex or gender assigned to them at birth. Pretty broad category. Can be abbreviated to trans man, trans woman, trans person. Both cis and trans people may or may not pursue gender affirming procedures. What's a gender affirming procedure? Laser hair removal. The things people are doing with their eyebrows now with the scrapies, you know, like those are gender affirming procedures. Breast augmentation, breast implants, like, you know, so I just like to normalize that a little bit. And I don't think it's fair for me to say like what someone's gender affirming procedure means to them versus like if it's more meaningful to this person versus that person. I don't like, that is not my business. I do think there are some, you know, for some trans folks, it is like a life-saving procedure. That's what I'll say to that. But also like body autonomy, return to that. Do what you want with your body as long as you're not harming others or yourself. That's kind of what I come back to. And just to normalize it, because I think sometimes with trans people get so like, oh, what genitals do they have? Or like, but what have they done with their body? And this kind of like really weird invasive curiosity. And again, I love curiosity and I sometimes have weird invasive curiosity, and that's just human nature. But it's like also being able to check it and to like recognize that, oh, this is happening because my brain is active and that's great. But I'm not gonna like do this, treat people weirdly because I don't know what genitals they have and now I can't interact with them because that's all I can think about, right? It happens though. Okay, so those are two key terms. Yeah. Bring it on.
To identify if someone who gender, let's say, assigned would be woman, but they're identifying well, then they can.
Great question. So thanks for asking that clarifying question. So we use the term that how someone sees themselves. So if someone sees themselves as a woman, that person is a woman. She may be a trans woman or she may be a cis woman. If she was assigned male at birth, she's a trans woman. If she was assigned female at birth, she's a cis woman. Yeah. So how that person sees himself like now. Yeah, great question. These are not bad words. Again, trying to be like value neutral. Sometimes people are like, don't call me cis. And I was like, well, it's interesting. We don't like to be labeled. But just, you know, so they're not bad words. They're not meant to distance. They're just like normalizing, talking about the differences of experiences we have. When we minimize our differences and pretend they're not there, the dominant rules and the subjugated identities suffer. So we need to be able to talk about this stuff. We need to be able to say these things. So, you know, if you haven't said these things, you know, it's your homework assignment tonight on your drive home or your walk home to just be like, lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, cisgender, non-binary, transgender, you know, like say it. Just like say it. It's okay. You don't have to whisper. You don't have to be scared. Oh, I see a chat. Let's see. Oh, can you repeat the questions? It's hard to hear. Yes, thank you for that. We'll do that. That question was like the difference between trans woman or versus trans man. So again, so trans man is someone who's assigned female at birth. identifies as a man. So they kind of change lanes a little bit. My whole goal in life is to dismantle the gender binary. So yeah. Yeah.
That's not like someone who's straight.
Well, that's sexual orientation. So someone, so we're talking about gender here, right? How someone perceives themselves. So it's important to have this word cisgender. So we're not like saying normal people, right? Because normal is value laden. Where like we're valuing the person who's normal and we're devaluing the person who's abnormal, right? So, you know, so instead of saying like, well, I'm a regular woman or I'm a normal woman, right? That feels icky. So being able to say, oh, well, I'm a woman or I'm a cisgender woman, right? Some people say, you know, I have a trans experience or I have a cis experience, right? And again, I like to emphasize that the category woman includes both cisgender and transgender women, right? It's just your path there maybe was different, but everyone's path to womanhood is different. Dolly Parton's path to womanhood, you know, is different than maybe some of us. Yeah, it's Latin. Yeah, so like same side as is what that kind of root word means. So like within this idea of, you know, so like, okay, there's a gender binary that exists in our culture. I'm all about trying to dismantle it, but it does exist. We understand. Even, you know, I'm trying to like cut the legs off of the table as the table's here. So kind of staying in the lane of assigned female at birth, raised as a girl, identify as a woman, cisgender woman. Yeah. Transgender woman was assigned male at birth. At some point in her life, maybe early age, maybe later in life, it's like, actually, you know, I identify as this other thing. That was not what I was assigned at birth, like change in lanes, right? So that's why I like to use that transportation, like transgender transportation. There's movement, transcendental evolution. There's many ways to be transgender. It's not like for some people, it's kind of still staying within that binary framework of just changing lanes. Like, well, I was assigned female, but I identify as a man. Or I was assigned male, but I identify as a woman, right? So just like changing lanes, still kind of staying within that framework of two options. That's fine. A lot of people have that experience. A lot of people don't. So folks who are non-binary, you may have heard this term is becoming more common and more people are identifying as non-binary. Just is it a broad identity term, part of the spectrum that just acknowledges that that binary system is not going to cut it, does not describe someone's experience. Just like the category female might not describe someone's intersex experience, or male. They're like, well, female or male, neither of those actually work for me, right? That binary framework doesn't work for people who are intersex on the physical sex level. So on the gender level, that option of man or woman or boy or girl doesn't work for me. Like, I don't even know what that means. And I honestly, I'm speaking honestly, I don't know what that stuff means. That does not work for, I identify as non-binary because this whole idea of girlness and boyness, like, just never made sense to me. I was like, well, I'm not like, you know, like I'm a combination of these things. Some people, you know, people experience it different ways. For some people, again, non-binary people might appear androgynous. Some non-binary people might really intentionally bring very hyper femme and very hyper masculine characteristics together in the same moment. Some people are just more like me. I don't know, like whatever that means. Some people are fluid in their expression, you know, so it's just really like how you see yourself and being like, well, woman doesn't work. That, like, for me, that's never felt right. Girl, woman, I've never ever, even since I was a little kid, I was like, that's not quite right. Even though I was a hardcore feminist since I was a baby, right? I was like, women are clearly the best ever, but I'm not one of them. You know, I love them, but like, that's still not me. So it's not like a misogyny thing. It's just like it's not me. But being a man, nah, it's not for me either, you know? So for me, it's just like something else, a different option. Trans people may transition is the word when they seek gender affirming procedures. This can be, you know, people often think about the physical transition of hormone replacement therapy. So if someone is assigned female at birth, but they identify as a man, they may take testosterone to have masculinizing effects on their body, just like a boy going through puberty, you know, a cisgender boy going through puberty would. You start taking testosterone, your voice drops, you get facial hair, your muscle and fat distribution changes. There's those physical changes. Some people may pursue surgical interventions, may have breasts removed or breasts installed, or, you know, they might have what we call bottom surgery. Some may not. Some people might want to do that physical transition, but can't because they don't have a supportive family or a supportive workplace or no one to take care of them in the long recovery process, or they have insurance, but the deductible is still $10,000, or, you know, like there's just so many complicating effects around why someone might want surgery or hormones, but can't get it. Or maybe they live out in rural Colorado and they don't really have any informed care providers who can help them, you know, and come into the metro area and staying for several weeks is a financial barrier. And that, you know, so there's just like a lot of reasons. They might not also just have a supportive place to be. If they transition physically, they might know that there would be unsafe repercussions for them. There's also social transition, and social transition is like what name and pronouns you go by. Maybe you start changing your gender expression a little bit. So, you know, I go by they pronouns. I was raised with she pronouns as a little kid, but then when I became able to understand and access this information and go out on my own, I started using they pronouns, right? So that was a transition, a social transition in my life. Appearance versus identity is really just bringing it back to treating people as they want to be treated, how they introduce themselves. So if someone, you know, introduces themselves like as a woman and as Sharon, and you can clearly tell that this person was assigned male at birth because you got whatever physical cues. It's just treating her as the woman she is asking to be treated as. I don't really know how you would necessarily treat men and women differently, but I guess people do. It's really just trying to treat people how they want to be treated, and taking them at their word for it. Even if you're getting clues that this person might be trans, that observation in and of itself is not bad, because it's not bad to be trans, right? And if you notice like, oh, I think that person might be trans, that's not a bad thing. I think that like every day, like, oh, maybe that person's trans. But what do I do with that observation? I keep it to myself, right? Or like hope maybe they'll come talk to me or whatever. You know, it's not bad to make these observations. I think sometimes people feel guilty when they're like, oh, I noticed the difference we have. Again, differences aren't bad. It's just like trying to remove bias. And we got to recognize the differences before we can identify the bias. So appearance versus identities is like treat people how they want to be treated. It's not bad to make those observations. I like this image because it shows that transgender is this broad umbrella category and non-binary is kind of like underneath it. But then like there's a little corner here where it's like not under the trans umbrella. Some non-binary people identify as trans and some don't. I identify as non-binary and I have for like over a decade. I've identified as trans sometimes. Some years I do and some years I don't. It's complicated. This stuff is still being worked out, and that's okay. Generally speaking, we include non-binary in the trans category when I'm doing data coding and stuff, right? Like I categorize that in the trans category, generally speaking, but how that shows up for an individual is different, right? It kind of goes back to that intersectionality of right, the terms people might use for themselves, how they consider it is a little different, and especially for concepts that are still evolving, and our ability to talk about it is still evolving. Yeah.
Sensitive are in many different states.
Mhm.
Severely curtail transgender.
Yeah.
So then we have non-binary. How do you define transgender legally or
Yeah.
how we want to do it? So if we have some time,
Yeah. Yeah, because that's a hot mess right now. Yeah, for sure. Oh, thank you for that. Yeah, so there was a question in the or a comment in the audience around you know, if we have time at the end to come back and talk about some of the political quagmire that's happening around trans and non-binary identities, and how do we define this politically, and the legislation that's going both in protection of and legislating against trans and non-binary people. And certainly glad to be in Colorado these days, where we're making forward movement on this instead of negative movement. So yeah, let's put a pin in that. We'll come back. This is kind of related to that. Just in sex and gender markers, they can change. Sex traits can change over time if someone's intersex, right? They might, once they hit puberty, their development can change based on those intersex. I didn't get really into the science of it, but again, at the end, if I can talk more about the science and genes if you want. Sex traits can also be altered over time. Someone's transgender and like elects to turn their outie into an innie or whatever. Like you can change your physical sex. You also can change your legal documentation even without that in the state of Colorado. Some states do require surgeries, some don't. Luckily, Colorado does not put that limit in, so people can change their documentation. That means sometimes characteristics might not match the way you expect. If you're, volunteering for an event and you got to ID people or whatever, their ID might not match their presentation, right? Changing your documentation is a whole process. So I went through it with my partner. That was my birthday gift to them because it's been a year-long process. Blah, blah, the fees, and now the passport, and now the degree, and it's a lot. So there's different reasons people may choose not to update their documentation, and then sometimes they're in between. And again, there's a lot of fees and just executive functioning to be able to navigate all the legal systems that go in with updating documentation. So ways that can show up in the world is, like making sure like in any registration forms, if you need someone's legal name for whatever reason, voter registration, but you're going to call them, maybe you want to make sure you have a place that says like chosen name or name you go by or preferred name or whatever. So that you can, yes, their legal name on their voter registration is Mary, but their name, you're going to call them up to be like, hey, you got to ride to the polls or whatever. They want to be called Max, right? So you have that ability to distinguish that legal name and documentation might not always be the like social name and documentation or social name. So that was all gender identity. Gender expression is more fun part of like outward presentation, how you express yourself, how you signal who you are. I feel like this is also really wrapped up in personality too. It's just like gender is a part of the swirl of personality. So whereas gender identity terms are more like man, woman, gender expression terms are more like masculine, feminine. I feel like they're more like the flavor, right? So you can be a woman and be a pretty butch masculine woman. You can be a man and be a pretty effeminate man, right? So just because you're effeminate doesn't mean you're a woman. Just because you're masculine doesn't mean you're a man. There's other terms, of course, masc, femme, queer, fluid, androgynous that people might use, terms they might use for themselves. It does not dictate someone's gender identity, right? So if I'm presenting today and I'm wearing a button down and slacks and have a more masculine presentation, it doesn't mean I'm a man today. And then when I go on a date and wear a dress, then I'm suddenly a woman. Like I'm always non-binary and my gender expression is more fluid and changes. For some people, they have very fluid gender expression changes. Some people don't. That's fine. All the ways to be are just fine. So just because someone's wearing a dress does not mean that they're identified as a woman. It might signal to you some clues that you're like, okay, I'm gonna have, I'm gonna approach and figure out how to address this person with, some cultural competence and compassion. Like, okay, I can tell this person was assigned male at birth. They're wearing a dress. Is this a trans woman? Is this a drag queen? Is this a man who likes wearing dresses? I don't know. Could be any of those. Could be more than one of those. So again, we just can't make those assumptions, and just the way we navigate that is just by asking folks, what's your name? What's your pronouns? How should I refer to you? We don't need to necessarily know how they identify. That can be a little bit more of like, that's not your first date kind of conversation per se. But, if you know someone or if they're like your close relation, you might get to those conversations of how you identify, but that's a little bit more intimate. What we all need to know to interact is name and pronouns, right? Just like your name is not like a secretly guarded thing, your pronouns normally aren't a secretly guarded thing. Drag is different. So I get asked about this a lot, so I made a slide just to say that drag is a performance, just as a performance art. Like some people are acrobats, they do Cirque du Soleil, and that's a thing that they do to be creative, to express themselves, to earn money, to find community of other circus weirdos, you know, like it's great. Drag in that way is also like a performance that you do. It's an artistic expression. Often has social commentary, political commentary, highlights that all gender is performative. RuPaul here is one of the most famous drag queens ever. And RuPaul is a cisgender man. So he's assigned male at birth, identifies as a man, and he has this gorgeous persona of RuPaul, the drag queen, right? So he's always a man, but it's drag is something you can take off at the end of the day versus trans is who you are all the time forever, you know, or like it's, you know, inside. So just to kind of distinguish that. Sometimes drag personas use different names. RuPaul's name is RuPaul as a man and as a drag queen, but some drag queens might use a different name when they're performing or different pronouns when they're performing because it's a character they're putting on. So it is different than trans. Sometimes there's confusion because there's gender blendy stuff happening, but also because trans folks have often participate in drag as a way to earn income, to find community, to express their creativity. Sometimes that's the only safe place for them to express themselves, right? So there can be some confusion. So trans people can do drag, but they're very different. I've found that trans women especially are very sensitive and don't like to be called drag queens because drag queens are like an over the top expression and playful like thing that you take off at the end of the day versus being trans in and out all day long is a very different thing. So there's people can be really sensitive to this. So if you mess up and stick your foot in your mouth, just understand, you know, don't demonize that person as being too touchy or sensitive. Just understand that it's bigger than you and you're not responsible for all the bigotry in the world. You're just responsible for that one little sliver of it that you hopefully learned from, and we'll do better next time. And we'll talk about handling mistakes. So the last kind of component of identity before we get into like more etiquette and how we handle mistakes and stuff, sexual orientation. So emotional, romantic, sexual attraction to folks, you know, this is speaking to attraction, behavior, and identity. Most of the time, we're talking about identity. When I'm talking to medical providers, we're talking more about behavior. So there's like different dimensions to it, but you know, your propensity to be attracted to other people. Some people are only attracted to men. That's great. Some people are only attracted to women. That's great. Some people are attracted to people of any gender. That's great. Nothing's better than the other. All the options for all the people. Key terms: lesbian, gay, bisexual, pansexual, asexual, aromantic, queer, straight, blah, blah, blah. There's like 100 more, right? That's fine. Sometimes this gets confused, I think, with gender because some of the terms here refer to the gender of the people involved. So we're kind of talking about two things at once. So like lesbian is someone who identifies as a woman who's attracted to other women. That does not mean a relationship in which there are two vulvas, right? There could be two trans women in a relationship. So there might be two penises in that lesbian relationship. Again, that's where I really talk more about behavior when I'm talking to medical providers. Like just because someone says a lesbian relationship doesn't mean you don't need to necessarily talk about condoms or whatever. Gay, attracted. I use gay pretty broadly too these days. Attracted to same gender, same sex, kind of depends for folks. Bisexual and pansexual are similar adjacent identities around being attracted to more than one gender. So I think, yeah, so sometimes people get that confused because we're referring to the people, sometimes the gender of the people in the relationship. So being a cisgender straight man, you know, is kind of that like default package that we assume boys will be. But RuPaul is also a cisgender man, but he's gay, right? So again, just kind of seeing that there's layers here. There's like, okay, there's sex assigned at birth, there's gender identity, there's gender expression, there's sexual orientation, and people can have any different combination of that. I remember those games when we were a kid, there was like a flip book and you could put the different heads with the different torsos, and yeah, you can have any different combination of characteristics, right? Not just, there's more than the two packages. A note about the word queer, which I use pretty loosely and comfortably here. It's a flexible term that basically means not cisgender, not straight. It can speak to someone's gender and or their sexual orientation. It has been used historically as a slur. So a lot of times people are like, oh God, you know, I'm getting uncomfortable with that. That's valid. That has been used that way, and it does have that history. It has been reclaimed by many in the community, not everyone, but it has been reclaimed by a lot of people as a term of empowerment. I love the word queer because to me, it's like, has this anti-assimilation, non-normative, like, yeah, these restrictions and constraints trying to be put on me. I don't got time for those. So that to me is a queer ethos and a queer essence. So I like it in that like kind of rebellious nature on it of like not even going to try to fit into normal. I don't need to limit myself in that way. So for me, I like that word queer, and that's kind of what it speaks to. But it does have that negative history, and not everyone has healed the wounds from that word. So it's one you want to be careful of. It's, you know, I used to think it was maybe more of a generational thing. I don't think that anymore, because we started a youth camp like 4 years ago or something, and we were going to call them queer scouts. And we were so excited. And one of the little gay boys was like, no way. I get called this at school in BVSD all the time. I can't, this is awful. And so we're like, oh, okay, Rainbow Scouts, we're fine. You know, quick redirect. And that shows too that like we have to redirect and like accommodate and like, oops, stuck our foot in our mouth a little bit there too. Because it is still used in a negative way and doesn't feel empowering for everyone. I love it, it feels empowering for me. It's becoming more common. But so my advice on that is you can use it if you're speaking broadly about the LGBTQ community. Like, how can the League of Women Voters, you know, better incorporate queer community members? Or how can we outreach to queer residents? Or what kind of queer issues can we learn about? You know, those are great questions because you're using it broadly. But if you're talking to an individual, you don't want to use that term for that individual unless they claim it for themselves. I'm queer, so you can totally be like, we had a queer speaker today, and this is what I'm thinking about now. That's great because I claim that word and I love that word. But you don't want to put it on someone if you don't know. It's not an in-group only term. You are allowed to say it if you're not LGBTQ, if you're cisgender and straight, that's fine and beautiful. And you are allowed to say this word as long as you're being nice and positive about it. Yeah, some terms are, you know, in-group only more, but queer is okay for folks to say. So queer dance party, you know, queer community, those are great. It does kind of speak, you know, to trying to bring that whole community together rather, you know, there's many variations. There's LGBTQ. LGBTQ plus is our board approved acronym that we use, but you can also do LGBTQIA, 2SP, you know, we're going to get all 26 letters. Just give us a couple years. So instead of going through the whole alphabet, we just say queer, right? So that's part of that. Those are a lot of the thoughts around this word. Yeah. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
But just given what cultural differences are there, right?
Mm-hmm.
Across lines of race, ethnicity, you mentioned kind of generationally,
Mm-hmm.
thing.
Yeah.
Does that tend to be? I mean, obviously we're speaking English right now, but
Yeah.
just curious about that. If there were, if there are anything we need to be, you know, aware of.
Yeah.
So I need to be aware
Mm-hmm.
of.
Yeah, I think what I think the important, you know, like take home message around that I would share is that people use different terms to describe themselves. I just did a session with SPAN earlier, you know, and they're dealing with people in intimate partner violence situations. And so they might be more like talking about their identities or their terms or referring to themselves with terms that you might in a deeper way than you might just find in a casual conversation, right? So one of the things that we talk about with service providers in that is that people might use different terms to describe themselves that are not the terms that we like advocate. Like now the term is transgender or trans, like those are terms we use. Some communities, some sub pockets of the community may use the term transsexual. That is not a term I'm going to advocate any of you use because it's outdated and it's got bad associations of being like creepy and sexual and predators and it focuses on genitalia instead of who someone is, you know, so like there's a whole list of reasons why we don't advocate the use of the word transsexual. However, there are, it's a generational thing on one hand. There are some folks who are older who that was the term they had. So they may say, oh yeah, I'm transsexual. And it doesn't mean that they're like self-hating, like, it just means like the term, they haven't kept up with times of terminology, which is fine. It's hard to do that. I've also heard that there's some like regionalism, like people in Texas use transsexual more. I've also heard that Black communities use transsexual more. So, if someone's coming to you and is like, oh, I identify as transsexual, especially if you're cisgender, I mean, really, regardless of your identity, it's not your place to be like, oh, that turns out he's trans now. Like, so I think that, so also not being surprised when sometimes people might use a term that you're like, oh, some people feel that way about the word queer, so I think just trying not to be like totally thrown off. And if someone's using a term, just, and if you're uncomfortable saying that term back to them, usually we say use reflective language when someone's like using terms to talk about them. If they're using a term that you're not comfortable saying, like the term transsexual, or if they're using like the F word or something, then you can just say LGBTQ, right? Or trans. That's why I like the word trans too, because it just transgender or transsexual, trans. So I think that's kind of what I'll say on that. We will get into some more like cultural diversity here in like just a couple slides too. So LGBTQ, just a little summary, because again, people get their wires crossed on these different aspects. I'm trying to say there's 4 aspects of identity here. Some are sexual orientations, lesbian, gay, bisexual. Some are gender identities like transgender. Queer can speak to sexual orientations and or gender identities and or gender expression. And then the plus is kind of like all the other letters we didn't specifically name in this particular acronym, but we include them too. Like intersex, right? Because some intersex people identify as part of the community, LGBTQ community, and some don't. We definitely have intersex people who are involved with OUT Boulder, but we don't include that acronym because we don't actually do any like particular programming. So we don't want to be disingenuous. Individuals may identify with one term or several terms that may at the same time, or that may change over time. The terms I've used to describe myself have evolved over the many years I've been out and active in the community, because my understanding of myself has evolved, and also the cultural understanding of the word has evolved. And I use lots of different terms that kind of just, I like to blur the lines a little bit on how terms are used, because that's fine. But then I found, especially with our youth, they like to really get in there razor thin, like this demi girl versus, like this sliver right beside it. And that's great. And I think it's because that's part of their exploration process, is finding vocabulary to talk about it. So to me, I'm like, this is what, whatever, like, I don't care about that level of nuance, but I think it's great that they're doing that, so I can be like, well, that's not for me to get into those like very specific subcategories. That doesn't serve me, but if it's serving them, then that's great. Yeah, I don't want to like diminish anyone's experience of getting really into nuances of all the different 1,000 terms people may use. That's cool. That's also why I'm not the youth program coordinator. This is just a visual representation that some people use called the gender unicorn. If you want to look at this again later, you can search gender unicorn, or I can send it in a follow-up link. As a way to kind of be like, okay, gender identity inside the brain, gender expression, outward presentation, sex assigned at birth, but more chromosomes, genitalia, physical stuff. And then sexual orientation, they have physically and emotionally, like the heart, who are attracted to. So there's these kind of 4, and you can be any, so it might be nice if you're like want some homework to take this kind of model, think about, okay, well, where am I in each of these categories, and what term would I use for each of these categories, and how did I know, and how's that changed? How does that compare to my partner? How does that compare to other people that I might know? Yeah, so no, and sexuality and gender diversity. So I'm talking within like the Western context for the most part, but this sexuality and gender diversity is a natural part of humanity. Like, it's just always been there. It's not new. All these new terms are new, right? Language is living and breathing and evolving. That's great, but the experiences are not new. the way we think about them, the way they show up might be nuanced, but this diversity itself is not anything new. There have been LGBTQ type experiences, sexuality, diversity, gender diversity, always since humans have been in societies and been like fighting each other. Many cultures don't limit gender or sexual orientation into these strict binary categories that our Western mindset does, and didn't have homophobia or transphobia before it was introduced by colonization. And that's really complex to try to decolonize, right? So you hear a lot of people talking about decolonization, and part of that is rejecting these strict, rigid homophobia and transphobia ideologies that have been forced into communities that were colonized through subjugation, through power and control, through genocide, through extermination, through re-education. So there are pre-colonial examples, there are modern examples as well. There are culturally specific terms and roles and experiences, of course. There's lots of terms in English, there's lots of terms in other languages, different ways of talking about it. And just like English is evolving and we got these new terms being coined and new pronouns being explored, that's happening in other languages too. So I like to start adding AA as part of my introduction because we have a lot of Spanish speakers in this area. So being able to model that, like, okay, if you're talking about me in Spanish, please use AA as my pronoun. That's a common thing for a lot of like queer sub communities. And it's also a brand new thing for a lot of Spanish speakers, just like using they pronouns. It's like pretty basic for a lot of people in the queer community. And it's like totally brand new for a lot of English speakers, just because, you know, that's how ideas disseminate stuff. Two-Spirit, the 2S, if you see that in the acronym, is for Two-Spirit, is an indigenous group of identities or part of the spectrum that speaks to LGBTQ diversity. And it's not as separated out as in the 4 categories as I did today of like sex, sign of birth, gender identity, gender expression, sexual orientation. It's just like a different framework of thinking about these things. So it's not really fair to say that like Two-Spirit is equivalent to trans or Two-Spirit is equivalent to gay, because it's not like an equal sign. It's like this similar part of our human experience of this diversity around gender and sexuality. If you love to learn about other cultures, if you're an anthropologist by heart, you know, this is a great resource. PBS has this cultural diversity within sexuality and gender, this map. That's a great starting point to learn more about it. So you can see like wherever these little things are, you can click on it and it'll say in New Zealand, it's this, or, you know, in Oaxaca, the Zapotec culture has a third gender, Muxe, this M-U-X-E one at the top. A lot of different indigenous communities have different terms. And when you're looking through this, it's especially like anthropological like texts on this, just keep in mind who the author is. A lot of times it's cisgender, straight white dudes who don't really grasp this and are thinking about it as this other thing rather than like human experience. And sometimes the terms we have are actually slurs, and like the original terms that people used in their culture were lost. And that's why there's this term Two-Spirit in English to describe indigenous folks, because sometimes they've lost access to those original words. And it's a way for them to come together and find community as well. So just keep, you know, always keep your critical lens when you're reading these texts, because sometimes it can be like exotifying and weird. So like look at your sources. But also this is a great place to start learning just how normal and natural LGBTQ stuff is. Here's some visual representation. I think it's nice to just bring a human face to this. Kumuhina, she is Mahu, which is a traditional third gender and traditional Hawaiian culture. And often these like LGBTQ type identities, again, I don't want to say that they are LGBTQ, it's like that, like how we understand those kind of identities. In other cultures had particular roles, often being like culture keepers or knowledge bearers, often shamans or medicine people or healers or counselors, kind of recognizing that they have a different point of view so they can actually bring value and be a good person to talk to when you're going through a weird thing. And Hina is, as an example of like a present day example of that. There's actually a documentary about her you can watch. Two-spirit couple here. They were participating in a powwow dance, and they're regional around here, you know, again, modern examples, also historical examples. Wihua was one of the most famous kind of two-spirit people in the Zuni culture, and she was actually selected as a cultural ambassador to represent her whole tribe to go to Washington, D.C. and negotiate with Grover Cleveland and, you know, do all the D.C. dignitary ambassador stuff, and was like the hit of the town, and people were like not really sure, like this very tall woman, you know, like what's going on. But that shows that it's other cultures. Some cultures are really good at honoring and respecting, like recognizing this diversity and making a place for it where people can blossom. And other cultures are really repressive and slaughter people and kill people for this stuff. I think that the United States is kind of in the middle, and it's being even more polarized. So lots of examples, modern and historical. It's nothing new, but also there's lots of new stuff too. Sex is not the same as gender. It's kind of like summary of this section. Sorry, I'm a little chatty tonight, so I'm a little over. Sex is not the same as gender. Wanting to, again, pull those things apart. One is physical body stuff. One is self-concept. Some people you can tell are LGBTQ by looking at them. Some you can't. Sometimes you can tell someone's trans by looking at them. Sometimes you can't. If they've transitioned to the point where like you would just assume they're cisgender. Just like intersex people are walking around you all the time, you're interacting with them and you don't know it. You're interacting with trans people, probably don't know it too. You just assume that that person was cisgender, either one way or the other, and they could be either way or the other. So characteristics might not match. There's this diversity. And ultimately, if I'm like overwhelming you a little bit, because I've been talking a lot and covering a lot of concepts, it's okay. Like you don't have to fully get it. You don't have to be an expert. You don't have to write a dissertation on this when you leave. Really just respect people, be kind to one another, treat people the way they want to be treated, right? And continue to learn, you know, be interested, be curious, continue to learn and do better. More and more people are identifying as LGBTQ. It's not just you, like there's data to back it up. With this slide, I like to share that the prevalence of left-handedness skyrocketed when left-handed students stopped getting punished for writing with their left hand. Just put that out there. But this Guardian headline from last February, 21% of Gen Z are identifying as LGBTQ now. So the more we like make space for it, like it's just part of us. And it's not bad, it's not scary. It's also not bad to be straight. It's not bad to be cis, like it's great, all of them. Whatever. We just want people to be true to themselves and not hurt other people. So that's kind of like core concepts. That's what we need to know. I think it's important to start with those concepts so we understand more why and how. That's at least how my brain works, is like I want to understand how something or the why behind it so I can actually hold the information. So we'll jump into etiquette. I'll try to be a little faster or briefer. I love this Maya Angelou quote. Do the best you can until you know better. Then when you know better, do better. Again, we're not shaming anyone for what they didn't know up until this precise moment. We're helping them. There's no stupid questions because we're going to learn from it. Knowledge is power. Usually people use the pronouns that best align with their gender identity. I use they pronouns because that works for me as a non-binary person. In English, pronouns are gendered. That is not the case in all languages. Spanish has gendered pronouns. I think like Hungarian does not. You know, like there's some languages where the pronoun is just for humans or non-humans or inanimate objects. They can be used in a plural sense, obviously. It can also be used in a singular sense. It has been used that way since the 1500s. William Shakespeare himself used they as a singular pronoun. And it's then it was not, if we have time, we can talk more about the history on that, but I'll try not to sidetrack too much. You can use it in a singular fashion. It is grammatically correct. All the style manuals recognize it. APA, MLA, Oxford English Dictionary. It's grammatically correct. A lot of people like to argue that. So you can tell them that Oh, newsflash, it's grammatically correct. It's fine. And also, we're trying to respect people. And grammar policing is pretty problematic and can be pretty racist and pretty classist and pretty homophobic and transphobic. So again, what are we more worried about? And if they really want to know, and it is grammatically correct. Some people use multiple sets of pronouns. So if you see someone with their name tag or their introduction, they say, I use she and they pronouns. That does not mean you have to use she and they every single time. Like Jenna uses she and they pronouns. She and they wants a sandwich and she and they are going, you don't have to do that. Just say you can move between them. Some people put the one they prefer first. Not everyone. Don't overthink it. Don't worry about it too much. If they have multiple sets of pronouns, you can use either or. If someone does put they probably want you to use that sometimes. They put she or he because it's easier for people. But, trying to meet you where you're at. So some people say pronoun inclusive or all pronouns welcome. That means it's like whatever pronouns is fine. It's okay to have pronouns that you use, like a pronoun preference, like ones that you want to use or not. That's okay. Like if you're like, well, should I not care about more pronouns? No. Like if she feels good to you, that's great. If he feels good to you, that's great. If they feels good to you, that's great. So this example here, Taylor said she'll be here shortly and asked us to order them a salad. That's an example of using she and they pronouns for Taylor. Pronouns are especially helpful for LGBTQ people, right? People with gender neutral names like Mikal or Taylor, and names from other languages and cultures, right? When we're interacting in international spaces or multicultural spaces, we don't always know pronouns associated with someone's name. So identifying your pronouns can be helpful on many respects. Again, intersectionality shows up everywhere. Using someone's name or pronouns refers to them in the way that feels right. It shows basic human respect, validates their identity, allows you to build trust. Building trust, better relationships, you get more information, better connections. You can feel like this happy gender euphoria of being validated, someone seeing you. Someone continually calls you by the wrong name. So invalidating, it's so annoying, right? It's like, ugh, you're not gonna connect with that person. You're gonna be like constantly annoyed with that person. Same goes for pronouns. Not using someone's pronouns does all the opposite. It invalidates them. It distracts them from conversation and work. You got that minority stress constantly bubbling. And now I'm like, instead of just walking into a room to be like, yay, I'm gonna go get to see these colleagues. I'm like, oh God, what are they? Huh? Like you're distracted. That erodes trust. It damages relationships and really negatively impacts mental health. And there's been a number of studies, especially on youth, that even if they have one person in their life who uses the name and pronoun that they identify with, their risk of suicidality drops a lot. And the more places that they can use that, the risk keeps going down. So, and again, converse on that. If they don't have anyone in their life who uses their name and pronoun, their risk of suicidality jumps. There's a lot of statistics out there that trans youth, 40% of trans youth are thinking about suicide. This stuff really matters. It seems basic, but it's super huge, really matters. So, pro tips for navigating this stuff. Offer your pronouns first, especially if you're cisgender. This opens the door because it's so hard to advocate for yourself. But if you can just like open the door a little bit for someone, it's just so much easier. I know that when I go to meetings with colleagues, especially new colleagues, if someone else introduces their pronouns first, I'm immediately so much more comfortable. And I feel like that does happen like 50% of the time in Boulder and the Boulder County area, right? Like it's huge. I feel like, okay, I don't have to like come in like aggro, like ready to defend my right to be in this meeting. It's more like, oh, okay, I can just be the normal person. So, hello, my name is Amy. I use she pronouns. There's not one way to do it. Some people like to say, I use she, her, hers pronouns. That seems a little wordy to me, but that's fine. You can say, I use she, her pronouns. I use she pronouns. We get it. There's the set. Or you could say, I use she, they pronouns. That's an amazing, half a breath of effort. And it can feel awkward at first. That's valid. But if your allyship is comfortable, you're probably not doing a very good job. So like it's awkward to do these things and to be an advocate and an ally. So this is an amazing way that's actually super powerful. And the wave of relief that people are going to feel is just, and they might not come up to you and say it, right? It's, again, you don't be an ally to get a badge. You do it because you want to make the world more comfortable for people and help people feel included. So this is a huge thing you can do. I use she pronouns, or I use she, yeah, you know. Encourage others to share their pronouns, but don't require it. Not everyone, you know, people are at different places with this understanding. So you don't want to put people on the spot, or they might be questioning and they're not sure what pronouns they use and they're not ready to say, and they don't want to, they're like, well, I'm just not ready to say that yet. So just, you know, if you're like, okay, let's go around and do our intros, their name and our pronouns and where we live, whatever. And someone forgets or leaves out their pronouns, just let it slide. You don't got to call them out and be like, you forgot your pronouns, Mikkel, you know, just let it slide. It's fine. And culture change happens by repetition, right? And then it just happens. In that SPAN training I did earlier, someone shared this story around, she's like, so I hold a group and I always start with introducing my name and pronouns. And last week I was just really busy. I had new people and I forgot and I felt so bad. But then one of the regulars just did it and then everyone else did after her. And I was like, that's actually a success story because you've created the culture where that's expected and it's no longer reliant on you as the one individual. The container is still held. It is okay to ask politely someone's pronouns. If you don't know how to refer to them and you want to refer to them, it's better to ask, you know, like, and you can just say, what are your pronouns? What pronouns do you use? How should I refer to you? Those are great questions. You can ask, and I love it when people ask me, I'm like, oh yeah, you say, it's normal. It's not weird, not awkward. It might feel that way at first, but it becomes normal. If someone's like, what are you talking about? You just be like, she, he, you know, like just help them out. And if they're just like being contrary to be contrary, then just move on. Just be like, you know, pick your battles. If it's something where that person's going to be receptive to learning, sweet. And you're out for it and you feel comfortable educating, great. But if you're like, this person's clearly just trying to grind my gears, then just don't indulge them. Use someone's current name and pronouns, even when referring to them in the past. When Max was a kid, they loved to sing. You know, if your kid is Max, but was born Marie, you don't have to like pretend Marie never existed. That would be the real loss, right? You still have this beautiful kid who loves singing. They still can love singing. You don't have to pretend that person never existed. It's the same person. They're just evolving. So use their current name and pronouns even in the past. Sometimes people get confused on that. Again, show respect even if you don't get it. Comes down to basic human dignity. And then, yes, it's okay to ask for someone's pronouns. It's not okay to ask for weird, like invasive personal questions around, you know, or to offer personal commentary. That's really weird. Like, oh, but you were such a pretty girl. Or, oh, but I just don't see you that way. Or this is really hard. Or this is confusing. Or what did your name used to be? Or like that stuff is like invalidating. It's valid if you're like, this is hard for me. That's a valid experience. But you don't want to like burden the marginalized person with your like, oh, it's hard for you. Great. You want to live a day in my shoes, you know, so just kind of keep, you know, checking yourself. Yes, you have your own experience and also you don't want to be a burden to others. So add your pronouns everywhere your name is. This is a picture of my name tag as an example. And your name tag and your bio and your virtual name and your social media and your LinkedIn, your resume, wherever you put your name, put your pronoun. Also do that verbally, you know, and in introductions. If you get to be a speaker at a conference, super cool. Get up and introduce your name and pronouns. It's a little thing that for the people it doesn't matter for, they like won't even notice. And the people it does matter for, it's huge. Or, hey, this is my colleague, Mikkel. Mikkel uses they pronouns. This is my colleague, Jenna. Jenna uses she pronouns. That's great. Also putting on applications and intake forms, just like wherever names are, try to have pronouns. And just like, be like, well, aren't we supposed to know what someone's pronoun is by looking at them? No. You don't know their name by looking at them. Why would you know their pronoun by looking at them? So again, trying to connect those things, I think helps. There's no one right way to do it. Here's many examples of how I might do mine. Again, you could do all three, they, them, theirs, or they, them, or I've started doing they/AA for bilingual spaces. there's other ways. There is a website here I can include in the follow-up email that people like to link to sometimes. That's just kind of like explains pronouns. So there's that if you are in circles who like, you know, the people you aren't that you're communicating with might not be as aware of what this is or be like, what's that about? Then that way they can do a little education on their own. MX is a gender neutral honorific instead of Mr. or Miss, Mrs. I was homeschooling some kids for a while, so they called me Mix McCall. Very cute. I pronounce it Mix. I've heard someone else pronounce it Mixter. Whatever. So if you have any like automated, you know, MailChimp campaigns or constant contact campaigns where people can fill out their information, just make sure that's a drop down option. So it's, you know, Mr., Mrs., Reverend, Dr., Mix, whatever. This I think is, I'm going to try to wrap it up. This is, I think, our biggest take home, how to do better at getting this stuff right. So really trying to move beyond like, I'm trying, but this is really hard for me. I was an English major and I taught English for 52 years. And I just, the they, it's just singular and it's grinding my gears. You know, like we're trying to, yes, those might be valid experiences that you're experiencing. And if you're experiencing it, it's valid. And also we're kind of trying to check that to be respectful of people. So some of those commentaries we can keep to ourselves or go to the SOFA group and commiserate there. Yeah, find your allies that you can commiserate and share experiences with without burdening the like marginalized group that's just trying to have some basic human respect. So we're trying to move on from, oh, I'm trying, but it's just really hard. When you slip up, correct yourself briefly and move on, right? When I first met Aiden, he was literally doing a handstand on a skateboard. You recognized it, you fixed it quick, and you stayed on story. You didn't get derailed by the mistake. You didn't wallow in the mistake. You didn't like, oh my God, I'm so sorry, Aiden. I know that your name I just really like it when you go by Lily. I just think Lily's such a pretty name, but I'm trying really hard, Aiden, but you know, I've just known you for 22 years now. And you know, like that is just gonna make Aiden feel really uncomfortable and be like, can this conversation ever stop? Please just make it stop, right? We don't want that. Just be like, oops, fix it, move on.
I think it's just, I don't know how we, you know, as an organization will kind of move, continuing our own journey, kind of do this. But I think that your example of go to the SOFA group, like that's a space where I would like to nurture a culture in the organization. Because I think as an organization, we're in transitional mode with all of the use of pronouns, understanding, respecting, to have someone say like, you know, Elizabeth, I think I screwed up and I'm not quite sure. Like, I don't think so either, but let's talk about that, right?
Yes.
And not make that burden on someone who's, you know, the recipient of a mistake. So I'm saying this not very elegantly, but I'd like to have a culture where we can, you know, as members come to each other and say, I'm not sure I handled that right.
Yeah.
Or I don't get it.
Yeah.
You know, how we do. And not again have to, and again, I'm being vastly generalized. We have people who are LGBT, I think many than any of us realize, who are in league. So I don't want to make it seem like an us them at all.
Yeah.
But find that person who, you know, among membership, you can just have that honest conversation with and not burden. So
yeah,
that was a long spiel, but I think that's just really important. Like if there's of the many things we can do as an organization, I would feel really great about having that as a part of our culture.
Absolutely. And it takes bravery to do that. And that is like rise to that challenge of being brave and being able to be like admitting what you don't know or admitting your discomfort. That's like, those are the first steps. And again, we're not here to shame anyone, and I don't want anyone to feel ashamed by anything I say or like the, you know, way I speak around this stuff. Because it's like everyone's experience of this really is valid, and having those safe people to talk to is so important. And just, you know, we don't want to ask people who have been in marginalized identities to do the work for us. We want to do that work ourselves. We want to like hire speakers to come talk to us, do our research, talk to our colleagues when we're struggling, Go out for coffee and chat about it. Ask for consent. Like, hey, I'm struggling with this. Can we grab coffee and talk about this? That is a beautiful question. Yeah.
I'm gonna be very brave here. In the League of Women Voters, is that turning off a whole population who might be just who would be advocates for many of the policies that we want?
I think that's a very insightful question. And there's not an easy answer to that. I think it's okay to have like women's only spaces. Like there's, you know,
But we're not.
right? Okay. I mean, there'll be some people who would not affiliate with something that's women. Like there might be trans men who are like, League of Women Voters is great, or Boulder Valley Women's Health Center is great, but I'm not going to participate in that because I'm not a woman and I would feel weird there. That's going to be some people's experience. There are going to be some non-binary people who are like, well, I don't really identify as a woman, but I like what they're about, so I'm going to go participate anyway. There's going to be some non-binary people who are like, ew, women, that's not for me. And that's okay, because everything's not for everyone. So I think, especially with an organization that has a really long history like this, I don't think you necessarily need to change your name, but it's more around like, what are the things you're putting out? What's the language you're putting out that people will pick up on that? Yeah, so I think that's actually a very insightful question to be asking about. Yeah. Yeah. Oh, thought I did something. How rude. Mhm. Yeah, I mean, I started putting my like name, my Zoom name is out very long, because I say Mikal, they, them, and then I put my name phonetically because no one knows how to pronounce my name when they look at it. And then I say OUT Boulder County. So not all of it doesn't show up, but yeah, you can go in there and edit it to your heart's content. Oh, that's not a question for me. That's a question for Zoom. Yeah.
So it does. It's type of intake and mix.
Mhm. Yeah.
I've been leading these conversations around what makes inclusive. Part of the conversations are what makes inclusive services. How would someone know that a system is trustworthy? And what they see in an intake form could definitely be probably some of the first evidence besides whoever is meeting them that when they walk in the door.
Mhm.
But I wonder if anyone's ever thought about, is there a place for pronouns on their intake?
Yeah.
Uh,
Or a different, like if you need the legal name, a place for them to put a different name. Yep.
Exactly, all those things. And then it makes me think, well, you know, we as a league, when we have our membership forms or our registration for events, or like having to go back through those things and come through and make sure that those are super inclusive as well.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. To systematize. Yeah. A few closing thoughts. If someone corrects you, it's a gift. Thank you. Incorporate it, move on. You don't have to be embarrassed. I mess up people's pronouns. I mess up, I say things that what as soon as they come out of my mouth, I'm like, oh, you know, we're learning all the time around sayings that have a terrible origin that we didn't know. And you know, we're learning. So it's okay. So if someone corrects you, it's a gift. Thank you, move on. And if you notice someone else messed up, doing a quick correction for them is a gift. It's okay to interrupt. He, Mikal, right? Someone mispronounces a name, or someone uses the wrong name or the wrong pronouns, just correct them. So, you know, you're actually helping them. Just, you know, quickly normalize it. We don't gotta stop and talk about it for a half an hour. It's just a 30-second less. If you keep getting it wrong, practice in your head, consider meeting with someone to practice. And I think the rest, okay, I do want to skip ahead. We've talked about a lot of stuff, but I want to skip ahead. This is like, don't make assumptions. Don't use gender, like, you know, try not to use terms like, oh, that woman needs help over there. You can be like, oh, that person in the red sweater. right? Just so we're not making assumptions. So it's in our language. It's not just name and pronouns, it's in our language too. This person needs to be helped. Oh, hey, you in the red sweater, I can help you now. Come up here. Whatever. Invitations to action, add your pronoun wherever your name is, introduce yourself with your pronouns. These are my invitations to you. Notice and adjust how gender appears in your communications. You know, some people love hey ladies, some people don't like that. This is a big thing in customer service. Research gender inclusive words and strategies in any languages you speak. This is one thing I want to show about advocacy stuff. Oops. This is the legislation we're putting forward this year. We have our committee hearing on Monday. I'm preparing some testimony right now. And it is to require newly constructed and renovated buildings owned by the state, county, and local government to provide diaper changing stations in all restrooms, not just women's. Dads change diapers. Have non-gendered restroom facilities on each floor where public restrooms are available. So this will be like new builds going forward. This will be designed in. Non-gendered restrooms, it can be single stall or it can be multi-stall. It's up to the designer. Ensure all single stall restrooms are non-gendered, and this will be existing buildings too. So if there's a single stall, two single stall restrooms, there's no reason for one to be men and one to be women's. They can just both, you know, it's better, reduces wait times, all the stuff. It's good. And it specifies that you can use non-gendered restrooms can be multi-stall. This is in line with the most recent international building and plumbing codes, but it's just like clarifying that because it's a new thing. And to use non-gendered pictograms. So like a picture of a toilet, which is more accessible, not only because it's not going to make trans people not feel weird. It's also like for people who maybe don't read, they're like, oh, like functional, right? Or a picture of a baby, not a picture of a woman changing a baby, right? So we're like non-gendered language because or non-gendered signage because that stuff's weird. If you want to get involved in that, you can sign on as, oh, yep. I'm sorry, this little thing's in my way. I can make it full screen. Ways you can get involved. You can sign on as an organizational sponsor if you're interested. Testimony from impacted parties and organizations. You can email me. I put my business card here. And I put a newsletter sign up here. And we have just our like weekly OUT Boulder newsletter, which you can sign up for in the first column. If you want to be a part of our advocacy alerts, the second or the last column, you can check that. And that'll be, we'll send like more additional information than just our regular newsletter will get. That's a new thing we're building up right now. Attend events, volunteer, donate, be visible and be heard for LGBTQ inclusivity. Get engaged on school boards and commissions and boards and all the stuff, and use your voice and your power. I will send along some resources afterwards, including some reading lists if you want to learn more. And then I'm going to close my share here. Sorry, I meant to leave us more time at the end, but I just can get on a roll sometimes. Yeah, questions, comments, points of discussion. I will send handouts. So I'm going to take it. If you want to take one and pass this purple handout. This purple handout is a summary sheet of what we've covered. This 3-page document is more about allyship. So some of the stuff we talked about and then more. I will send these virtually so everyone on the internet can get them. I have more copies. I also have them available in Spanish here. So if you want them in Spanish, I'll send them along virtually as well. Or if you have people in your life who speak Spanish and want to read it in their preferred language, do that. I'll leave the newsletter sign up here. So as you leave, if you want to sign up for newsletter, no pressure, but you can. And also my cards are up here. I help organizations looking at their systems, FYI, I can help with that. Or just if you're wanting to learn more about the SOFA group or whatever, reach out to me for any reason. I try to be as responsive as I can. I'll also send out a feedback form tomorrow when I get to my office. I'll send a follow-up email with all the stuff. And if you don't mind just taking like a minute and a half to fill that out, it's really helpful for me. Also, you know, it helps with our data for grants and stuff. So yeah, the relationship doesn't end here. OUT Boulder is here, and we are really working to not be Boulder centric, to be like Boulder County beyond, really going beyond the confines of the county line even. Oh my God, that's funny. You know, I haven't done that, but I say, why not? I'm, you know, most of the services I end up providing are like are responsive to community needs. So, I mean, that's something we could talk about for folks online. If there's a question like, could I come and hang out in an organization for an hour and then kind of provide some insight? And yeah, I think that could work. We could chat about that. I can't on the 11th of February. I'll be out of town, but I would be happy to, you know, yeah, I'm here as a resource. Yeah. Any questions or comments from folks connecting virtually as well, please? You can unmute yourself or drop in the chat. I think they're good. And I'll wrap up slowly. So if you do want to have like a more like one-on-one convo, I'll slowly wrap up. But also I know we want to let the staff get home at. Oh, found it very informative. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah. Yes.
Really, student has to not everybody. Newer knows we pre-COVID and showing up at Boulder Pride. And
Yeah.
Collaborating space. Really look forward to closer relationships.
Yeah. Yes.
You want us to sign, there's some email address.
If you want.
And then here's who go around there.
Okay. All right. Thanks everyone for tuning in. I'll follow up